The city at night was a creature of light and shadow, a world away from the sunny, bustling place it was during the day. For Amani, the quiet of the late evening shift at the Bean Sprout Cafe was a welcome escape. It was a small, cozy place tucked between a laundromat and a closed-down bookstore, smelling always of roasted coffee and vanilla. At 20, life was a balancing act between college classes, this job, and sending money back home to her mom. She wiped down the already clean counter, the soft cloth moving in slow circles. Her thoughts were on a difficult psychology paper, her brow slightly furrowed in concentration. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant whoosh of a lone car. The sharp ding-a-ling of the door chime cut through the silence like a knife. Amani looked up. A polite, "We're about to close," ready on her lips, but the words dissolved before they could form. 3 men walked in, their presence instantly sucking the warmth from the room. They moved with a quiet, deliberate purpose, their expensive-looking dark suits seeming to absorb the light. They didn't speak, simply fanned out, their eyes scanning the small cafe as if checking for threats. And then, there was their leader. He stepped slightly ahead of the others, and he was different. He was handsome, with sharp features and dark, intense eyes. But it was the feeling he gave off that made Amani's skin prickle. He felt cold, like a stone that had been lying in the shade all day. This was Yoon. His gaze swept past the empty tables and landed on her, and it felt like being pinned in place. He didn't look at her like a customer looks at a server. He looked at her like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. He approached the counter, his footsteps silent on the tile floor. Amani instinctively took a small step back, her hand tightening around the damp cloth. He stopped on the other side of the counter, close enough for her to see the perfect line of his jaw, the unwavering stillness in his posture. He didn't look at the menu board. His eyes were only for her. The memory hit Yoon with the force of a physical blow. It had been 3 days ago. He'd been in a car across the street, handling a tense, unpleasant piece of business. His window was down, and his attention, for just a moment, had been stolen. He saw her through the large window of the cafe, laughing with an elderly customer. Her laugh was bright, a genuine, sunny sound that seemed to cut through the grimy tension of his own world. She had tucked a loose curl behind her ear, her smile warm and easy. In that single, unguarded moment, she looked like pure joy, a feeling so foreign to him it was almost painful. He hadn't been able to forget her face. Now, standing before her, the contrast was jarring. Her warmth against his cold, her nervousness against his control. The words left his lips in a low, hushed whisper, meant for her ears only. "I want some sugar, so I'm having you tonight." The air left Amani's lungs. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and disbelief. The words were so bold, so possessive, it felt like a violation. But then, a spark of defiance ignited deep within her. She was not a thing to be had. She straightened her spine, meeting his intense gaze, her own eyes flashing with a fire that surprised even her. "No," she said, her voice remarkably steady. "You can't just have people." A flicker of something, not anger but profound surprise, passed through Yoon's dark eyes. It was there and gone in an instant, but Amani saw it. He was so used to people flinching, obeying, or looking away. He was not used to being told no. He didn't reply. He simply held her gaze for a heartbeat longer, as if memorizing the fire in her eyes, then turned and walked away. A single, sharp nod to his men, and they all filed out as silently as they had entered. The door chimed again, and they were gone, leaving behind only the scent of cold night air and expensive cologne. Amani let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding, her knees feeling suddenly weak. She leaned against the counter, the encounter replaying in her mind on a dizzying loop. The cold look in his eyes, the whisper, her own brave refusal. Who was he? The following days were normal on the surface, but Amani found her thoughts drifting back to that intense, silent man more often than she cared to admit. It was on a Thursday, as she was taking a shortcut through a less crowded park on her way home, that the memory came crashing into the present. A group of loud, rough-looking men noticed her, and one of them stepped into her path, saying something unkind. Amani's heart sank, a fresh wave of fear washing over her. Problem here? The voice was calm, low, and familiar. Yoon was there, leaning against a lamppost she could have sworn was empty a moment before. He wasn't looking at her. His entire focus was on the man blocking her path. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make a threat. He simply pushed himself off the lamppost and took one step forward. His expression was neutral, but the air around him crackled with a dangerous energy. The troublesome man, seeing the cold promise in Yoon's eyes and the two other suited men now visible a few feet behind him, paled. He muttered a quick, "My mistake," and he and his friends scattered like startled birds. The park was quiet again. Yoon finally turned to look at Amani. "This isn't a safe way to walk home," he said, his voice softer now. "It's the quickest," she managed to reply, her voice a little shaky. "Not tonight, it isn't," he said. "I'll walk with you." And so he did. He walked her the entire 10 blocks to her apartment building, a respectful distance between them. They didn't speak. The only sound was the rustle of their footsteps on the pavement. He wasn't trying to impress her or charm her. He was just there, a silent, powerful shield in the night. When they reached her door, he simply nodded, a brief, almost imperceptible dip of his chin. "Lock your door, Amani," he said, and then he turned and melted back into the shadows from which he came. Amani stood there for a long moment, the sound of her name on his lips sending a strange, warm shiver down her spine. He was dangerous, she knew that. But in the quiet of the night, for the first time, she wondered if the danger was only for other people, and if for her, he might just be safe. The silence that settled after Yoon melted back into the shadows was a different kind of quiet than the one Amani was used to. It was not the empty silence of a closed cafe or the peaceful silence of a sleeping city. This silence was full. It hummed with the echo of his low voice, the memory of his intense eyes, and the solid, real presence he had been for those 10 blocks. Locking her apartment door, she leaned against it, her heart not pounding with fear now, but with a confused, thrilling curiosity. He was a storm cloud, dark and unpredictable, but he had only brought her shelter from the rain. 2 nights later, he returned to the Bean Sprout. It was the same late hour, the same pre-closing lull. The door chimed, and Amani's head snapped up, a jolt of anticipation straight to her core. There he was, alone this time. He wore a simple black sweater and dark trousers, a stark contrast to the formal suit, making him seem both more approachable and more intensely himself. He didn't smile. He simply met her gaze from across the room and walked to the same counter, taking the same stool. "Tea, please. Whatever is hot," he said, his voice a quiet rumble. Amani nodded, her hands moving automatically to heat the water, select a chamomile blend. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken words. She could feel him watching her, his gaze a physical weight. She placed the steaming mug in front of him. "Thank you," he said, his fingers brushing against hers as he took it. A spark, small and electric, jumped between them. He didn't react, but his eyes held hers for a fraction too long. "For the walk," Amani finally said, her voice softer than she intended. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," he said, the single word leaving no room for argument. "I did." He took a slow sip of his tea. "Do you always walk home that way?" And so it began, a hesitant, fragile bridge built one question at a time. He didn't ask her out. He didn't flirt. He asked about her life. He learned she was studying to be a teacher, that the thought of standing in front of a classroom of young minds filled her with a nervous excitement. He learned she sent money home to her mother in a different state, that she missed her family with a deep, constant ache. In return, he offered her fragments of himself, pieces of a puzzle she was desperate to solve. He spoke of a life of heavy responsibility, of a family that was not like other families, of a name that carried weight and expectation. He never said the word mafia, but she felt its shape in the spaces between his words, in the way he talked about loyalty, about protecting what is yours, about the difficult choices that left shadows in a person's eyes. Their meetings became a secret ritual. He would appear just before closing, 2 or 3 times a week. Sometimes he would just sit and drink his tea in a silence that became more comfortable than awkward, a silence where they simply existed in the same space. Other times, they would talk for an hour, the cafe growing dark around them as Amani forgot to flip the open sign. He started walking her home every time, the 10-block journey becoming a cherished part of their routine. The space between them on the sidewalk slowly, imperceptibly, shrank. One night, he didn't stop at her apartment door. "Come for a drive with me," he said. It wasn't a command, but a question held in a low, hopeful tone. Amani, without a single thought of her usual caution, nodded. He drove to a small, hidden lookout point on a hill overlooking the city. The world was spread out below them, a sprawling tapestry of twinkling lights. They got out and stood by the car, the night air cool on their skin. It was here, under the vast, star-dusted sky, that he finally spoke the words that had started it all. "Amani," he began, his voice barely a whisper, yet it seemed to fill the entire night. "That first night, when I said I wanted sugar." He turned to face her, his expression more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "I wasn't talking about the kind you put in coffee. My life, it is a very dark place. It is all about power and fear and cold, hard choices. I saw you through that window, laughing. You were so full of light, so full of warmth. It was like seeing the sun for the first time. When I said I wanted sugar, I meant sweetness. I meant kindness. I meant you. I saw your light, and my darkness wanted it. I was drawn to your warmth." Tears pricked at the corners of Amani's eyes. All the fear, the confusion, the mystery of him suddenly melted away, replaced by a profound, aching understanding. He wasn't a monster. He was a man who lived in shadows, desperately reaching for the sun. She reached out, her hand finding his. His fingers, always so steady, trembled slightly as they interlaced with hers. "You don't have to live in the dark all by yourself," she whispered. He lifted his other hand, his touch impossibly gentle as he cupped her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. She rose onto her toes to meet him. Their first kiss was not a claiming, but a promise. It was soft and searching, a slow, tender exploration that spoke of deep longing and newfound hope. It tasted of chamomile tea and the cool night air and a future they were only just beginning to dare imagine. When they finally parted, breathing each other's air, he rested his forehead against hers. "Amani," he breathed, her name a prayer on his lips. From that night on, their world became a private universe of two. They found hidden places, a quiet bench in a forgotten garden, his car parked by the sea, the rooftop of her apartment building at dawn. They talked for hours, sharing stories from their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. The tough, unyielding man she had first met revealed a dry, clever sense of humor that could make her laugh until her sides hurt. He showed her a deep, almost poetic way of seeing the world that he kept locked away from everyone else. In turn, she showed him simple joys, the fun of trying a new food, the comfort of a shared blanket, the peace of just being held. Their intimacy grew, a slow, burning fire. A touch on the small of her back as he guided her through a door. His arm slung comfortably over her shoulders as they walked. The way he would tuck a stray curl behind her ear, his knuckles grazing her cheek. Every point of contact was a new discovery, a silent conversation. It was a spicy, simmering tension built not on rush, but on a deep, growing certainty. They were learning the map of each other, not just with their hands, but with their hearts. He was her dangerous protector, and she was his safe harbor. And in the quiet spaces between their kisses and their whispered conversations, they both knew they were building something that was meant to last. The city lights, which had once felt so distant and impersonal from the hilltop lookout, now felt like a blanket of scattered diamonds guarding their secret world. In the weeks that followed their first kiss, that world became Amani and Yoon's only reality. Their love was a carefully tended flame, burning bright in the hidden hours between sunset and sunrise. They met in the safe, neutral territory of the now-closed bean sprout, on their bench in the forgotten garden, and in the front seat of his car with the windows down, listening to the distant ocean. They were an island of two, and for a while, it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. But no island is forever untouched by the sea. The real world, with its harsh rules and dangerous players, began to lap at their shores. It started with small things. A car that seemed to follow Amani for a few blocks too long before disappearing. A new, unsmiling face that would sometimes appear at the other end of the street when Yoon walked her home, watching them with cold, assessing eyes before melting away. Yoon's phone would buzz with an urgency that made his jaw tighten, and he would have to leave her sooner than planned, his kisses becoming quick and hard, full of an unspoken apology. One evening, as they sat on her rooftop watching the sun paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, Amani voiced the fear that had been growing in her heart. "They don't like me, do they? The people in your world." She wasn't asking a question. She was stating a fact she had felt in the weight of the stairs, in the tension that crept into Yoon's shoulders. Yoon was silent for a long moment, his hand finding hers and lacing their fingers together. He looked out at the fading light, his profile stark and beautiful. "My world is built on walls," he said finally, his voice low. "It does not like open doors. It does not trust anything. It did not build itself. You are a beautiful, unexpected garden that has grown on the other side of my wall. They see you as a weakness, a distraction." "And what do you see me as?" Amani asked, her heart in her throat. He turned to her then, his dark eyes blazing with a ferocity that stole her breath. "I see you as my strength. You are the reason I breathe. You are the only real thing I have ever had." The confrontation, when it came, was as inevitable as the tide. It happened on a night when the air was thick with the promise of rain. Amani was leaving the cafe when two men, larger and more openly hostile than the ones before, stepped out of the shadows and directly into her path. They didn't touch her, but they stood too close, their presence a clear threat. "The pretty little bird needs to find a different tree to nest in," one of them sneered, his voice like gravel. "This one is rotten. It will break, and you will fall." Before the cold fear could fully paralyze her, a voice, calm and deadly, cut through the tension. "Step away from her, now." Yoon was there. He hadn't appeared. He had simply materialized, a statue of controlled fury. He wasn't looking at Amani. His entire being was focused on the two men. The air crackled, so thick with danger it was hard to breathe. The men who had seemed so brave a moment before visibly shrank under his gaze. This was not the Yoon who held her gently on the rooftop. This was the leader, the man from the shadows, and his anger was a silent, terrifying force. "Tell the others," Yoon said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more frightening than any shout. "You look at her again, you speak to her again, you even think of her again, and you will answer to me, not to the family, to me, personally." The message was unmistakable. It was a line drawn in the sand, a declaration of a loyalty that superseded all others. The men nodded, their bravado completely gone, and hurried away into the night. The second they were gone, Yoon's entire posture changed. The fury drained from his face, replaced by a raw, aching fear. He crossed the space between them in 2 long strides and pulled Amani into his arms, holding her so tightly she could feel the frantic beating of his heart against her chest. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "I am so sorry you were ever touched by this, by my life." In that moment, wrapped in the safety of his embrace, feeling the tremor in his strong arms, Amani understood everything. The danger was real, but his love for her was his anchor. It was his strength, not his weakness. He had chosen her, publicly and definitively, against the pressures of his entire world. The last of her own fears melted away, replaced by a steel resolve of her own. She would stand with him. Whatever came next, they would face it together. A few nights later, he took her back to their hilltop. The city glittered below them, a kingdom of possibilities. He turned to her, taking both of her hands in his. His palms were warm, his grip firm and sure. The shadows that usually lived in his eyes were gone, replaced by a clear, bright light she knew was just for her. "Amani," he began, his voice full of emotion so deep it made her want to cry. "You are the sweetness I never knew I needed. You are the light that found me in my darkest hour. Before you, my life was a series of commands and consequences. It was a path I walked alone. You taught me about warmth. You taught me about joy." He took a deep, steadying breath, his thumbs stroking the backs of her hands. "I don't want just tonight. I don't want just tomorrow. I want every sunrise and every sunset. I want to build a life with you, a real life, away from all the shadows. I want forever. Will you stay with me? Will you choose this, choose us?" Amani felt the happy tears well in her eyes, spilling over to trace warm paths down her cheeks. She didn't need to think. She had known her answer from the moment he walked her home in silence, from their first kiss under the stars, from the way he had stood as her shield against the world. She reached up and placed a hand on his cheek, feeling the strong line of his jaw beneath her palm. "My forever," she whispered, her voice clear and sure, "started the moment you walked into that cafe and I found the courage to tell you no. It started the moment I saw the good man hiding behind the tough one. I choose you, Yoon. I choose us. Forever." A slow, beautiful smile spread across his face. A sight so rare and precious, it felt like a gift. He leaned in and kissed her, and this kiss was different from all the others. It was not a promise of what could be. It was a seal on what now was. It was a kiss of forever, deep, tender, and filled with a love that had been tested and had emerged unbreakable. He held her close, his arms a fortress around her, and they stood together for a long, long time, two souls who had found their home in each other, their future shining as brightly as the city laid out before them. Did Amani and Yoon's journey capture your heart? If you were swept away by their story of a love that conquered darkness, then you won't want to miss what comes next. Subscribe to the channel for more unique and moving romance stories that explore the deepest connections. A new, unforgettable love story is just around the corner.